All right, everybody, welcome to a commentary on culture, episode 3. We're gonna do a little bit different stuff today. I got a lot more stuff to talk about. Still working on Spotify. I don't know. It turns out this RSS feed stuff is a little bit more complicated than I thought it was. So I have to find I don't know, like a website to host my shit at, and then I don't know, kind of copy that, make my own RSS feed, and then apparently Spotify will post it. Um, let's see. Everything's going on YouTube. Telegram is the best place, especially if you're driving. That's literally why I'm using Telegram, is because you can drive and listen to it and download it, and it's just so easy. There's no, Spotify listens to you and shit, and I'm sure Telegram does too, but they don't have a marketing program, so that takes advantage of that stuff as far as I know. So that's why I recommend getting Telegram. Otherwise, YouTube's going to be on YouTube. The pace for the episodes has been kind of slow because I have been just insanely busy, obscenely busy. A lot busier than I was expecting, and I knew I was going to be busy. So there's a lot of big events for me coming up in my personal life, a lot of things that just happened, and a lot of things that are happening now as we speak, and it's just insane to kind of try and fit this stuff in. So, if you want to catch my opinions on everything, I post them all to Facebook, so not really. But I do keep the Facebook feed lit, so that's fun. Today, so last time that I did an episode, I was kind of talking about how, one of the extreme reactions to a feminized society is women who kind of yearn for that, that positive male influence, right? That's kind of center of attention, that's demanding. And, this has been going on for a long time now, but we're going on 60 years of, serious cultural feminism. And it's to a point where, you got these Psychology Today articles coming out saying, that women are having fantasies about, being forced into sex, right? Or being forced to be raped or whatever, being raped. And it's kind of funny, right? So we talked about that kind of extensively, where it came from, why it's here, and, it's going to obviously continue to be around. And it was just hilarious because I came across this the other day in my newsfeed that April 24th is apparently International Rape Day, which, is exactly what, there's what, 15, 20 listeners right now, it's not like I'm influencing anything, besides this small little social circle. But, this is kind of what we were talking about, is that, the gut reaction, the initial reaction for men, because they're so without, serious, paternal leadership, right, is to just bend, and, oh, well, that's what you want? Okay, I'll give you what you want, And that's literally what it is. It's a joke. Don't get me wrong. It's not gonna happen. It's not real. When we talk about these guys, you got to think about the type of man that gets sucked into a TikTok video, right? They're not the kind of guy that's going around, forcing women to, submit to them sexually. It's so out of character. Right, which is why, maybe one idiot will, get the wrong idea from it, and really fuck himself up, and horribly hurt somebody. But people take it seriously, but it's almost like they take it a little bit too seriously. Relax, guys. It is just the internet still, but this is an interesting topic, right? Because this is, exactly the wrong way to go about dealing with this stuff, and this. They're reacting to, I guess I should back up a little bit, right? Because the article's been out for 10 years. Psychology Today article's been out for 10 years. But really this stuff has had kind of a slow proliferation into society, right? I didn't even hear about it until 2 years ago, and it's only become more common to kind of realize since then. And this is in no way are women really helping this, right? Because, they're making TikToks about how, they like to be, forced into having sex or whatever, right? Like this is, it's a cycle that, is just degenerate and just eats itself, but it's self-perpetuating, right? It's that, it's awful. It's just a toilet bowl of just disgustingness. But, this is reality, right? So this is a harbinger of things to come, because as women continue to go without, as a group, right, as a demographic group, obviously there's individuals, right? Like I would say that, not to really put myself on a pedestal, but my relationship doesn't deal with these problems, and people that I know that handle their relationships the way that I do don't deal with these problems, right? Both people are happy, their needs are being met. There's no ridiculous ideations, these massive fluctuations and fantasies and, back and forth between this, struggle for power, right? And this is the extent of it, it's this, basically, if you're looking at it, on a graph, it's basically something that just gets dynamically unstable. It gets worse over time because it's going uncorrected. So we can expect this shit in the future. And it's like, where does this go? And that's a really, really dark path because it's like, well, why are women so involved with serial killer novels? Why do they like, reading about Jeffrey Dahmer and, the Zodiac Killer and stuff? Not just reading, but like, murder podcasts, and horror movies and stuff. Like, where does it go? Because at some point in time, this is going, we're talking about, they're having fantasies about being raped, right? That is just so obscene and so beyond what is, decent, right? And normal, and there's really not much farther for it to go, but before, they get to a point where, they start to fantasize about other really extreme things, because there's just no end in sight to this, infection of feminism in young men. And as long as that keeps happening, this is what we're going to keep seeing. So, which is unfortunate. But, it was kind of interesting that they came up, that's kind of the part that I didn't really talk about, and the way I did talk about it was to say, don't do that, right? I didn't really talk about how that's a legitimate course of action for a lot of young men because they don't understand that, giving a woman what she wants is not the proper answer, right? You're not, what a woman wants is a symptom of what she needs, right? Like just because she wants to be sad and eat chocolates and stay in bed and just not do shit all day doesn't mean that you don't say, get up, we're going to do stuff. You have to recognize that there's a need there that needs to be met, before you continue. It's kind of the same here, like it's, but, because men are so feminized, right? And that's kind of the theme that I keep going back to, because there is no way, for the common culture to reinforce what being a man is. And because, in every movie that you watch, it teaches you how not to be a man, right? How to be this, psychotic parasite. And this is what happens, because they don't have direction. They don't know what to do. This is honestly, in a lot of cases, it's a joke, right? But there's an element of seriousness behind it because they're seriously trying to figure out, is this a legitimate course of action or not? Because they don't know, because there's nothing there, which is why it's important. So, this obviously ties into politics and stuff down the road. It's got a bunch of connotations and connections all over the place. In the family, out of the family, in society, in, your local community, on the individual level, right? And I didn't really want to talk about it too much. I just thought it was kind of funny to bring up. But it's important that, this is why I'm focusing what I'm talking about on the culture, right? On cultural elements. Because, the ramifications for small, right? Small fundamental changes, in all reality, right? What I'm saying is not, to be a rapist or to be brutal. It's just to say no, and to be the dominant member of the household, right? That doesn't mean do all these things at all. Not that anyone could have listened to what I said and taken that from it, but it's like, this is a serious, idea that people have. I mean, it's a joke now, but it won't be, and that's, I guess, maybe that's why people are getting up in arms, but I'm just so desensitized to this stuff that I just laugh at it, because it's just so stupid. Once you've been to the intellectual bottom of it, it's like, what are you thinking, man? Another real world topic, and this one's a little bit more serious. This one actually got me kind of heated this weekend. So, we were just talking about how men act, how men should act, and how they should treat their families and stuff. It's been kind of a common theme that I want to talk about because it's so fundamental to, our culture and our society and, our individual happiness, right? Our individual versions of success and stuff. So I think it was this week or last week or whatever, kind of before the weekend. It seemed like it came up pretty quick. But there was an Army Sergeant First Class. His name is Sergeant First Class Penderton from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, right? So he's an Army drill sergeant. It's kind of a jack dude, your typical drill instructor, drill sergeant kind of a build, right? Kind of, likes to be in the gym and, likes to go home on the weekends and drink beer and, I don't know, talk about being a lethal warfighter and stuff, right? Probably kind of a tool in real life. I don't know. I'm just kind of going off experience here. But, regardless, right? So he's hanging out in his house, barbecuing or doing whatever. Obviously, like in the video that comes up, he's barefoot, right? It's not like he's out causing trouble. He's literally at his house. And a young girl that's his neighbor and one of his neighbor's daughters, who's white, runs up and bangs on his door and begs for his help, right? Because there is a young black man in his neighborhood who is going around ripping these young women's shirts down and groping them, right? Grabbing them, by their breasts and stuff, and just being awful, being just an animal, right? Going out and just being a fucking animal. And what does this guy do? So he goes outside, and makes the guy leave, which is, so coming from what we were just talking about, and that people were getting mad at, people joking about, rape day or whatever. Like, this guy is the embodiment of what everybody pretends to be online, right? Somebody actually comes to his neighborhood and he goes outside and makes them leave, and we're watching the video, so this guy eventually, he's towering over this kid, right? Just absolutely towering over this kid. He knows he can win. He knows if he really wants to, he can physically destroy this kid. But he doesn't. He holds back, right? If the races were switched, if everything was switched around, it wouldn't go that way, right? We know it wouldn't go that way. We've seen the videos, time and time and time again, right? Any excuse to get even, right? But this guy has a lot of restraint. He sits there, he's like, you need to leave, you go away, you don't belong here. This isn't your neighborhood. I've lived here for 10 years. I've never seen you. Go away. And the guy doesn't leave, and eventually he gets to a point where, he's out there with his wife as well, right? And of course his wife is chirping in and stuff, which not a big fan of, I don't think that conflict is the proper place for a woman. Genuinely, I don't think that that's a good idea. And this is, this is why, right? Is so this little thug, right, can't fight the big white guy. So what's he do? Well, the woman starts chirping up. Well, he can take her on, and he knows it. He subconsciously knows it. See, he's not very smart, and you can tell because, he's very scared, but, he kind of gives it all away. He doesn't have a whole lot kind of hidden, right? It's literally, he's under pressure, and he goes for the weakest, avenue to get out, right? The weakest pressure valve, so to speak. And, that ends up being Sergeant First Class Penderton's wife. He kind of tries to duck around him, right, and go after his wife, and it looks like he's just getting verbal, but we've seen this so many times where, it goes from being verbal to physical in a millisecond, and it's so fast that you're not ready for it. So what's Sergeant First Class Penderton do? Well, he pushes him. He immediately recognizes that there's a physical element now building to this conflict, right, and immediately out-escalates the guy. And I can tell you from my experience, that is literally every part of the training ever, out-escalate whoever you're dealing with. If it becomes a physical confrontation, you need to out-escalate them. And that's common knowledge. Everybody knows that. Everybody who's looking at this, who is analyzing it, should immediately recall that, right? Like, hey, that's common theme there. That's that mechanical action, where this person is acting as a threat now. They're clearly trying to escalate. I have to maintain, that monopoly on physical force, or things could really get out of hand, right? And, to that mindset's credit, things don't get out of hand. That's the end of that physical altercation, right? The guy pushes him. He says, get the fuck out. I'm gonna make you leave, and he means it, but he doesn't follow through with it, right? And so eventually the kid leaves, right? The kid is pushed out, he goes home. And that's the end of it, or so you'd think. But the guy made a fatal, Sergeant First Class Penderton, right? He made a fatal mistake. And this is one that we're going to talk about in a bit. So his family member, or one of his neighbors, was recording him. And, he was in the right. Let's kind of establish that. This is not somebody that's out doing something that's wrong. He is in the right 110%. This is his house, his neighborhood, his neighbors, his family. This is his home. And he is protecting it from people who are clearly out to cause harm. And, he doesn't think, you can tell, he doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't, he's doing everything right. The same thing that, I have heard a million people, just not a million, right? But, a lot of people, everybody that I can think of that's just like him, that fits that same kind of demographic, has the same mentality, right? If you're not doing anything wrong, why does it matter that you're being filmed? Because you're not doing anything wrong. Well, he found out firsthand that that's actually not the case. The Wild West is back, baby. We're dealing with a whole new monster, It doesn't matter if you're right. What matters is he's a white man who was physically dominating a black man and told him to get out of his neighborhood. And this has a lot of connotations in the black community, right? For a lot of different reasons, which we could go into, but that would make like a 4-hour podcast. And I'd have to do a little bit more research to kind of get my stuff straight before I just start running my mouth. So I'm going to skip over a lot of that, right? But this kind of hits on a deep-seated anger that's there, which I'm not going to say is unjustly there in the first place, right? Like from my perspective, I kind of get why there was gentrification. Honestly, this is why, because this guy had a neighborhood. He knew everybody in that neighborhood. He knew kind of, how things were going. And this outsider comes in, and kind of messes that up. And then that outsider goes away. This video goes on Twitter or whatever, and it goes viral, right? Because this is just such an inflammatory time, where these things they carry so much more weight than ever, than they should ever carry, right? So this goes viral, it just makes a lot of people mad. And within a couple, I believe a day, I think it was within 24 hours, there's a mob of 500 black nationalists outside this guy's house. And this is where it gets really sad, because all those neighbors that ran to him, right? This is how you know he's the good guy, is because he wasn't there when it started. They ran to him and begged for his help. And when the mob showed up, they left him. They absolutely abandoned him. He went out there willing to fight that kid, willing to be physically, aggressive to protect his household. He didn't know if that guy had a gun. He didn't know if they could had a knife, which is a real thing, that's a real thing, these small kids, especially small black kids, right? When they're in that situation and they're, I guess I should back up before I kind of dig myself into a hole there, right? There's been a million different examples of white security guards, of, white men doing this. And instead of physical violence, right, instead of just fighting on equal terms like he was clearly expecting, or at least was postured for, they pull a gun or they pull a knife or, they pull a weapon or they pull up friends who have guns and knives and weapons, right? And one of them walks up behind whoever is trying to be the good guy and, gets a cheap shot in or, a literal shot, right? Executes the guy. It's happened so many times. It's it's hard to even bridge that gap sometimes with someone who doesn't get it. It's like, dude, that's where I struggle with some of this stuff. It's so hard, now that I've seen it, now that I realize just how prevalent it is and just how reinforced it's been, it's so hard to dumb it down to that entry level, hey, welcome to this, This is how things are. This is changing that perspective is just tough. But so this mob shows up, and he's basically abandoned by everybody, right? He's abandoned by his command. He's abandoned by his unit. No one from his neighborhood. He's in the video boasting about this is a close neighborhood, which is why he's there, which is why he's out there trying to protect his neighbors. And there's no one, no one sitting in the rooftops, no one sitting there, waiting for someone to make the wrong move. Like, I get, being prudent, I get it. I'm not saying, that people need to be outside, postured up, that, and in fact, in that case, that's not what I would do. But I would absolutely, someone starts throwing rocks through his window. Yeah. Like it's time to escalate, because clearly nobody has that under control. In the Fort Jackson or whatever little suburb, shithole suburb of Fort Jackson that was, they didn't have that under control. And that's, evident because the sheriff totally, dropped all the charges against this black little thug who was ripping down, literally walking up and sexually assaulting young women, right? I mean, and it's important that he's black because that's literally why. If it was a white kid, nobody's dropping the charges. Nobody's calling Sergeant First Class Penderton a bully. They're not calling him all the. he doesn't get the victim treatment. A white kid does this, he goes right to jail where he belongs. Somebody else does this. They go right to jail. But because of the racial argument right now, because of the racial conflict, I don't know. It's just dumb. It's just so dumb. So, there's a couple lessons to take away from that, right? And there are a couple reasons that I want to talk about it. For one, this is what you ought to do. I realize that guy got fucked over, and I realize that he's kind of a martyr. You can expect this treatment or worse, because when you do it, the mob is going to be emboldened. The mob's not really emboldened right now. They showed up at his house, but they didn't kill him. They didn't kill his dog, and they will. And that's the part that's important to realize is that, we are literally, within a couple years of this podcast coming out, it's already happened, right? That's the other thing. It's already happened. It's already out there, but it's going to happen in a publicized way, right? Like where this guy, it was a thing, got plastered all over social media, right? Fuck around and find out, we're at your house, and they'll kill him. They'll eventually, not him in particular, right? But, the next person that does this, the next person that's, maybe not the next one, but the next, 2 or 3 down the line, right? That's caught, committing the mortal sin of telling a black person to stop being, a violent member of society and to act civilized. And they're going to get the treatment, because the mob is the mob is emboldened by their own success, and they're not being stopped, right? Which was the significance of Trump not doing anything significant, or not doing anything serious during the riots last summer, right? From the top down, nobody wants to push the button and say, we need to reassert control. And so this is going to continue to get out of hand the same way that the rape thing got out of hand, right? Like the rape fantasies and stuff. So you have to kind of be prepared for that. You can expect this, and you can expect it in a lot more extreme situation, right? Like yours probably won't even make it to social media. If this happens to me, it might get a little bit of coverage, and the only reason it would get coverage is because, they would try to kill me, right? They would try to come after me violently, and the same way for everybody that this happens to in the future. And the second one is don't let anybody film this stuff, and this will be a recurring theme as we kind of witness what's going to happen over the next decade, 2 decades or so, 2 or 3 decades, right? People like us, right? People like us that want to live in peace, that want to be able to call the police department when there's a thug outside and have them come and take that problem away. We want our problem solved by the government. We want to pay our electric bill and have the lights turned on. We want to go to work and we want to have, just a normal life. People like us, in order to accomplish that, are going to need to get used to working in secrecy. and going to need to get used to telling people not to take pictures of it. Don't put pictures of yourself on social media. Don't put pictures of yourself, in these different environments. And this is why, this guy, is, caught in this awful situation because someone who clearly sided with him, right? They're not recording him as if he's the bad guy. They sided with him, put that video on social media, thinking that it was a moment of pride, right? We evicted this guy. He was in our neighborhood causing problems, and now he's gone, right? We won. You can't film it. You can't let that stuff get out. You need to solve this stuff in secrecy, and you need to make sure it gets solved in secrecy, and that includes talking to your family and your friends and being like, look, we're not out to make a scene. We're not out to show anybody else what's going on. Our neighborhood's safe, and it's a secret that it's safe. And this is why. And, finally, the lies don't matter. This guy, he's in jail for some stupid bullshit reason. It'll probably get dropped in all honesty, but who knows, because we're approaching a time when it won't get dropped. But the army will probably take his rank because they're faggots. But, the laws don't matter. You have a right to live in peace. Your neighborhood, it has not your neighborhood doesn't, but you have the right to live in a safe neighborhood. Right? Your neighborhood gets to be safe. It doesn't matter what the law says. It doesn't matter if they pass a law saying that white people don't get to own property. It doesn't matter if they pass a law saying that you don't get to own guns. It doesn't matter if they pass a law saying that, you have to have, so much diversity in your neighborhoods. It doesn't matter. You have the right to live in peace. You have the right to exist. We earn this right to be here. And no piece of paper gets to take that away. So this is ultimately the point where all of that libertarian saber rattling, comes to fruition, right? Nobody's going to fight over their guns. Nobody's going to fight over, some piece of legislation, taking away, your right for this, that, or the other, right? What they are going to fight over, and kind of the point that I'm talking about here, the point that I'm making, is your family. Your family's right to exist. And that's ultimately what this guy was doing. He was saying, we have a right to exist here in peace. My daughters and my neighbor's daughters or whatever, they have a right to be outside, without being raped, and that's going away, right? But, and we kind of talked about this originally, but, if you do intervene, don't expect anybody to come to your rescue. I mean, clearly, nobody came to this guy's rescue, and they owed him, which is so profoundly infuriating, right? They owed this guy. He went out and put himself out on a limb for them, exposed himself to physical violence for them, and they completely abandoned him. Nobody came around, the cops abandoned him, and that's just kind of it's important to not only build these bonds as, I'm going to help you, right? But I expect you to help me. That's been an important topic when I talk to my neighbors, is like, I don't, this is not a one-way thing. I'm not here to be your soldier, right? I'm here to help you, and you're here to help me. We're a team, if we need to act as a team, right? So that's all I want to talk about for those. Kind of cultural issues. It kind of touched on what we were talking about already, kind of the role of a man and what you should expect as a man and how you should behave. But that's kind of something that I hadn't really covered too much. I was a little bit worried about covering, news stuff, because that tends to be what's most inflammatory. The reason that I got mad at it, though, was I saw people that are like me that would do the same thing in that situation, being like, oh, that guy's a fuckhead. No, he's not, dude. That guy's you. That guy is you when you have a family. That guy's you when it's your neighbor that's being accosted. We have to stick together, And that goes for just being on the internet, right? You don't have the option to just be like, oh, that's somebody else. It's not connected, justice, right? Rational justice or whatever. No, dude, if he looks like you, walks like you, and talks like you, he's on your team. We have to get back to this tribal nature, in order to survive, because there's no one else coming. And that's really the big takeaway from this. You hear people like Joe Rogan, go on and on and on, and all the, the big name Jewish scientists, or, the philosophers like Eric Weinstein and, I don't know, Jordan Peterson. He's not Jewish, but whatever. Like they bring him on. They talk about, oh, tribalism. We got to get away from tribalism. And that's not the case. Like it's good for everybody else if you get away from tribalism, right? Which is apparent because they feel like they can come into your home and come into your neighborhood and threaten you basically when you say that you want to live peaceably. When you say you want to live in a place that's not a shithole. And, that's really important, right? We gotta, the tribalism is necessary, unfortunately, right? Because we don't have an equal means of getting even, right? The state was supposed to intervene and didn't intervene. When you call 911, they're supposed to come out and make the problem go away. And that didn't happen. Which, that's why it's such a turning point, or why it's just such a prevalent example of, you got to change your mindset towards this stuff because, the reality is that we live in a multicultural world. You're going to have altercations with people of different ethnic backgrounds, of different racial backgrounds. And, if you think for a minute that they don't know that they've got, the upper hand in any discussion, in any argument because of what's happening right now, you're stupid. So that's why it's so important that we change our thinking on this. And when you see somebody that's in a position that looks compromising, if he looks like you and walks like you and talks like you, just at worst, don't say shit. Just don't say anything. Just don't say a word. Don't have an opinion. Don't talk to anybody and be like, and it matters. It really matters. It matters so much more than you would think. You cannot, say anything bad. Just even if it looks awful. Think about what happened with the Derek Chauvin case. It's come out now that, medically, it's impossible for him to have killed George Floyd, right? Think about all of that, just the awful shit that happened immediately following that. The stuff that happened to his family, the stuff that happened to his community, the stuff that happened to him, right? His wife divorced him. Think about, how important it was, that the state, right, that the government just didn't say anything. They didn't need to fire him. He didn't do anything wrong, right? They've medically proven it, Whether or not they find him innocent or guilty is beside the point. It's, any person who sits there and looks at it should rationally come to the same conclusion. But that's why it's important. Look what happened. So they let that guy get, basically sacrificed to the mob the same way they let this guy get sacrificed to the mob. And, what's the end result? We're that much farther down the road. Now the mob is that much more emboldened. So if you just shut up and don't say anything, if it really looks bad, just wait. Just don't say anything. I don't like to not say anything. I like to get in there and be like, no, this is, you're wrong. Because, I know it's coming. If it's in the national media like that, if it gets any attention like that, it's wrong. Because it's intentionally meant to, it's a weapon, right? That's kind of what you have to take away from this is that, people are right when they say the media picks these cases specifically because there are open and shut cases of police doing bad things. There are open and shut cases of white people doing bad things to black people, right? But they don't pick those. They don't escalate those. They don't put those out there because that's not a weapon, right? If it's a guy that, does something that is just overtly awful, everybody just automatically goes, oh yeah, that guy deserves to go to jail. There's no uproar from it. You can't, you can't use it as a weapon to say, oh, this is part of, toxic whiteness or whatever. Because it's like, no, he's in jail. He's going to jail. That guy that, shot the dude in the back who was, had the handcuffs or whatever in South Carolina, he's in prison, right? That didn't help. That didn't escalate anybody's position, right? But this did. This instance did. This moved their ball down the court because now you're afraid. If you watch this, and you paid attention to it at all, the next time this happens in your neighborhood, it's in the back of your mind. It's in the back of your mind. What if somebody films this and the mob shows up? I have a job, I have a family, I'm really, everybody thinks they're well enough armed to take on the apocalypse. But, let's be honest, none of us have the arsenal, right, to do this by ourselves. We just don't. Nobody has their fire teams around, right? And if you do, I mean, power to you. That's really cool. But most people don't. Most people that are listening to this don't, and most people that are going to be in these situations don't. And that's why they're preyed on, right? Is because they know that's how they that's how they win, right? It's a cultural game. So I want to close this out by hitting a little bit of more of. I didn't really want to talk about St. John of Chrysostom anymore, which I found some more cool stuff about that. So his name actually means St. John, the golden mouth, or the one whose gold comes from his mouth in Greek, because of basically the epic, homilies that he gave, and how influential he was in early Christianity. But I wanted to shift gears here. This is kind of in the same page, but it's at a lot more fundamental level, right? Which, that's kind of the whole point of what we're talking about. And I've already mentioned that a few times now. It's small things that build into these big things, right? And the problem is that we've taken so much of a macro view of things that we no longer care about these little things. So we're gonna discuss this. We're gonna talk about how it applies, and then we'll kind of tie it back into what we were already talking about. I believe this is his second to last homily in the book. Page 96 on marriage and family life. The homily is actually titled "How to Choose a Wife." Right? And we've already kind of talked about how to choose a wife in one of the earlier homilies, but this one in particular, he really kind of hones in on some important themes that he expresses in kind of a two-dimensional aspect, but because we have such a changed world, in a way, and it applies so much more than it did before. So, starting on page 96, he says, "In particular, you must not seek money when you are about to take a bride. You must consider that marriage is not a business venture, but a fellowship for life." And he goes in to explain, I hear so many of you talking about so-and-so getting a rich wife, and basically chastises them for it. A woman cannot throw a spear or hurl a javelin, but she can make up for the distaff, weave cloth, and manage everything else well that concerns the household. She cannot give an opinion on the council, but she can give it an opinion in the household. Often, indeed, whatever her husband knows of the household matters, she knows better. She cannot manage the affairs of the city well, but she can raise children well, which are the greatest of treasures. And then going down, since we know all this, let us seek just one thing in a wife, virtue of soul and nobility of character, so that we may enjoy tranquility, so that we may luxuriate in harmony and lasting love. The man who takes a rich wife takes a boss rather than a wife. Even without wealth, women are filled with pride and prone to the love of fame. If they have wealth in addition, how will their husbands be able to stand them? The man, however, who takes a wife of equal position or poorer than himself, takes a helper and ally, and brings every blessing into his house. Her own poverty forces her to care for her husband with great concern, to yield to him and obey him in everything. It removes every occasion for strife, battle, presumption, and pride. It binds the couple in peace, harmony, love, and concord. Let us not, therefore, seek to have money, but to have peace, in order to enjoy happiness. Marriage does not exist to fill our houses with war and battles, to give us strife or contention, to pit us against each other, or make our life unlivable. It exists in order that we may enjoy another's help, that we may have a harbor, a refuge, and a consolation in the troubles which hang over us, and that we may converse happily with our wife. How many wealthy men who have taken rich wives and increased their substance have yet destroyed their happiness and harmony as they contend in daily battles at table? How many poor men who have taken poorer wives now enjoy peace and look upon each day's sun with joy? Rich men, although they are surrounded by luxury, have often on account of their wives prayed to die and be relieved of the present life. Thus money is of no use when we do not have a partner with a good soul. So, I wanted to talk about this. So, there's multiple levels where this applies, right? The first one is obviously the literal. He's literally talking about, don't go for someone that's materialistic that's going to, your companion, right? So you've put so much effort into yourself, being this, virtuous person. You don't want a companion who is just constantly chasing the next fad, right? Constantly involved. I've been really heavy on the social media thing because that's where it's so prevalent today. But I mean, it's with a lot more than that, right? It's with all of the stuff, all the trips, all the clothes, all the the things they do to their hair, and you know, yeah, ideally, right? Like in a family, those are bad behaviors, and you don't want that to be taught to your children. You don't want to teach that to your young boys, especially considering, the economic forecast, right, for our country and our generation. We're not going to be in places where, we can afford to, be these super materialistic people like our grandparents were. That's not gonna be even realistic, right? So, don't build the habit now. So, basically, to summarize it though, right, what he's saying is don't marry women with options, right, who are comfortable using them. Don't entertain someone who can never be fundamentally satisfied, right? And that kind of ties into materialism. And that's the reason why, so he's talking about this is kind of a phenomenon that should be pretty easy to identify with, right? Like it's important to understand that he's not saying, go down to the local dive bar and pick up trailer trash, that's just as materialistic and just as vain, as a rich person, right? But he's saying, and this is kind of a topic that has kind of followed Christianity, and it's kind of a weird phenomenon in itself, but you're avoiding people that have the opportunity, as a rule of thumb, right? You want to avoid people that aren't capable of, injecting themselves full of dopamine. You don't want people that are addicted to that stuff because it builds think about what that does to your family, right? You can't have a family, you can't have a happy household because, they're so consumed with, getting their next kind of dopamine shot, right? And there's no effort put into, all of the ugly little things that come together that build a strong and beautiful family, right? Because they're not pretty, and they're not easy, right? And it's so much more, short-term wise gratifying, to go do this stuff. There's a metaphysical level to it as well, right? So going beyond just the tangible, right? Trying to avoid materialism and, people that, that have options that you can never compete with. You don't want to date somebody that's out of your league. You don't want to build a family with somebody that's, that again, for some reason settled with you. I hear that all the time. It's like, date up, just shoot for the moon. And, and I meet like older men all the time that are like, yeah, she was, I totally, just way out of my league and this, that, and the other. And like, if they're telling the truth and they're not just being modest, they're miserable. Their wives are miserable. And if you look at them, it's pretty easy to tell, right? And this is kind of why, it's because they know intrinsically that they could have got someone a little bit more suited to their needs, right? And it would cause you a lot less stress to be suited, to have someone suited a little bit more for your needs, right? So, basically what he's saying here is get away from, kind of the rat race to this, to this common, stereotypes for, what is, societally attractive, at that given moment, right? And look underneath for some real, strong metaphysical value. And lastly, and this one is my favorite, your wife is not a financial asset, right? He's talking about so not only are there a lot of problems that are caused by, kind of using wealth as your reasoning behind getting married, but obviously, right, with the with the materialism and the dating out of your league or whatever, right, you're kind of setting yourself up for all kinds of emotional turmoil there, but financially, your wife is not a resource. Your wife is not a financial powerhouse, that's It's so common, and you hear it everywhere. Like literally, going through all this marriage prep stuff in the Catholic Church, it's a talking point. Oh, two incomes bring in more than one. Your wife is not a bank. She's not a tool, to be hoarded out to the corporate machine, right? For money. And obviously, I'm not saying that, you need to literally live in poverty, right? To, suit this ideal. I'm certainly not. But, at the same time, when you approach this, when you approach your wedding or you approach your relationship, right, as if, your eye is on a tangible prize, right? It's on this, earthly, money, right? The short-term gratification, or, if it's enough money, right, long-term gratification. You're focused on something other than the transcendent, bond of man and woman, right? Which is what you're supposed to be focused on. And that's kind of where strong families come from. And there's so many reasons for this. I mean, like, realistically, women don't like men who make less than them. Like, that's just a reality. It literally, like, there's so many studies on that. Like, women do not like being the breadwinner. There's been so many articles. I mean, I wrote an article on this. That's kind of why I feel overwhelmed even talking about it, is because, like, the moment I researched it, it was just, like, overpowering. It was just so saturating, to come across this stuff. It's hard to even quantify. I mean, like, there's so many articles on, college graduate women, right, which are now the majority in the country of college graduates, right? Women make up the majority of college graduates, even, especially at higher levels of education. They supposedly cannot find men who are as competitive, right? They're having trouble finding partners. And, that's for a number of reasons, right? For one, promiscuity and birth control. Now they're older, right? So they're no longer as attractive. But, the big one, it comes from them, right? They're not settling for men who make less than they do, right? It places a lot of financial strain on them, and we kind of talked about that last time with the strain of responsibility and leadership and stuff. And, finances is, one of the number one reasons that couples get divorced, right? So it's kind of the same thing, it's the same level of importance as that leadership stuff. Your wife is not the financial breadwinner. And so the same stuff that he's talking about, 1,600 years ago, almost exactly, actually. That was only a couple of years ago that he had his 1,600th anniversary of his death, which is apparently a huge deal in the Orthodox communities. I didn't know that. But anyways, so this is a big deal back then too, right? And it's the dynamic has changed quite a bit, because we're not talking about dowries anymore. Right now, we're talking about economically competitive women who are typically, they're attractive, right? They come from families that are very successful, that teach them how to be successful. They've got a lot of drive there. It's been kind of culturally reinforced, because there's like this aesthetic appeal to, attractive people, getting better. This is like it's just kind of a natural flow of societies, right? For that to kind of weave its way out, and to show itself. Like kind of that natural, hereditary aristocracy that I was kind of talking about last time. It's kind of prevalent everywhere. And, so it has this huge backfire, right? Because these women get to this point where, and I've literally personally encountered this where, like, they get to this point where they're so educated and they're so overemployed that, like, they spend... They don't realize at that point in time, right? Like when a woman gets into her 30s, she is on a very fast downward slope for fertility, and a lot of these young women don't realize in their 20s that, their biological clock is real, and all the memes and all the cute videos and stuff are fake, or they're not fake, right? But they're so, just emotionally over the top, they're not real, right? I guess fake is a good description, but they meet such a low bar. They don't actually satisfy needs. It's just such a surface level thing. They get themselves into positions where, they basically are crunched for time to have kids, right? And so it starts, the beginning of that cycle starts with, well, I have to find a man who's as equally competitive or whatever, as equally, as valuable, right, on the sexual marketplace scale. And, what they find out the hard way is that the men that are, that are now considered their equals or whatever, right, that are similarly educated, they don't want women that old. They don't want women that educated. They don't really care about that. That's never been something that men find attractive. As much as like women like to pretend it is and like weak men like to pretend it is, that's just not. That's why you see basketball players, they're not surrounded by hot young doctors, they're surrounded by hot young cheerleaders. It's totally different dynamic. So, they get to this point, right? And then they, so there's like that stage, and then they go right into this, they have this desperate realization that like, this is it. They've got like 3 or 4 years to have a kid, or, the health complications just get too insane, autism rates, but all these disability rates just shoot right through the roof. And that's the end. That's it. That's, the family's over at that point. That's a goal that, they realize they needed, and now it's unattainable, and they get fucking desperate. They like literally, talking about reaching down, like I'm talking like literally offering college age dudes, pretty much whatever they want in exchange for, like a kid, right? Or this, basically trying to be a sugar mama, but it's with so much more, exasperation than, your traditional, like, when people think of like, older men, kind of, being sugar daddies for young women, there's really not a lot of, desperation there. It's just like something that, that kind of keeps them entertained, for the most part. And with women, it's not like that. They're desperate. They need somebody, to provide them with a family. So that's kind of a tangent. But going back to this, so it's really bad for them. It's really bad for you. Divorce rates. That's the chief reason for divorce rates, right? How many? I don't want to say that, but there's so many examples of that. Where it's a common factor. It's been statistically analyzed so many times. And it constantly comes back up. So, at some point in time, you just have to admit that it's real. All the conditioning was wrong, and you just got to get through it, which is tougher for some people than other people. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but I feel like I didn't really have that much of an issue with it. So that's kind of, those are just, bare bones, ways these things apply. Kind of to us, but I think an example, so going back to, the first thing that we were talking about, right, with the whole International Rape Day thing, that's, we've gotten so far away from, a strong family foundation as a culture that like, that's the extent of it, right? So you have the foundation, and then you have, so we've been getting off it now for about 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, whatever, depending on what time frame you want to use. This is the opposite, so it's just kind of like a dichotomy, right? Which one do you want? You got to pick. Right. So, well, I guess I shouldn't say it's just a dichotomy and you have to pick, but anyways, so that ties into how a family should run, why families don't run the way they should, and obviously the ultimate derailment, I guess, is a good way to put that. So, alrighty, fellas. Well, I'm gonna call it quits. We pretty much hit everything that I wanted to hit. I wanted to get a little bit more into the meaning behind the St. John of Chrysostom stuff. I feel like there's a lot of meaning to pull out there that I really didn't this time. But anyways, so that's enough. See you later.